Okay, everyone, I'm glad to present to you on this very World Federalist theme of UN peacekeeping and evolution and Canada's role in that evolution. And this theme is very close to my heart because the idea of using international military forces to be able to create peace and justice, fairness for all people all over the planet is such a key idea that's motivated my career and motivated my life. And I've dedicated my life to try and enhancing the UN's role in the world and the role of UN peacekeepers. So we'll explore a little bit what peacekeepers are, what Canada has done to help create and then evolve the concept of peacekeeping, and what the Canadian government has done over the last 5-6 years under Justin Trudeau. Okay, so we have to start off with a planetary view. That is, this is what we want to protect and preserve, our very fragile planet. And it looks so beautiful from outer space. But if we actually look down into these continents and on the oceans, we find there's lots of conflict. There's human beings, which are the dominant species on the planet. They've subdivided themselves into nations. And these nations are sometimes attacking each other, sometimes being very inconsiderate to other human beings, and even the human beings within their own system. So we want to be able to find ways to protect and preserve this planet. And that has to be done through some sort of global governance, because national governance isn't quite going to do it. Okay, so UN peacekeeping is a means by which we can send international forces, not representing the narrow national interests of one nation or one region, but representing the whole community into missions which have been put all around the world over time. There's over 75 years of UN peacekeeping, and we have seen how they have been able to create peace and help the peace process. Although in the end, the decision to bring about peace in a conflict is up to the parties to that conflict. But there's a large role that can be played by facilitation, mediation, peacekeeping, interpositioning between fighters that UN peacekeeping can do. And so we're going to explore that concept about what peacekeeping means and how it can be used for creating sustainable peace. So peacekeeping, the definition that over the years that I preferred is the deployment of international, that is not from one particular nation, but from many nations, international police, military, and civilian personnel to a conflict area with the consent of the main parties to the conflict. That is, includes the government. So this isn't an invasion force. You're there by consent, and you're acting impartially, that is not in favor of one party or the other, in order to stop or contain hostilities, supervise the carrying out of a peace agreement, and assist with humanitarian relief, human rights compliance, and nation building. So it's really about creating peace, but this is a positive peace. That is the peace that's sustainable, that's built on the nation building and a strong peace process. And so you're helping out with a peace agreement, helping to stop the fighting so that there can be a chance for peace, and then doing all the things that are needed to help people alive to see a better day. Now, the NATO and Canada, and to some extent the United Nations, uses a concept that there are peace operations which are broader than peacekeeping, and it's really what I'm talking about today is the peace support operations, PSOs, or the UN, you could say, peace operations, that involves peacemaking, which is the negotiation for a sustainable peace. That is, you are doing the mediation and facilitation to get parties to agree to put down their weapons and agree to stop fighting and work together. And peace building is creating the infrastructure for the peace. That is, you're doing all the buildings and the societal infrastructure, like the dialogue that's necessary, all of the governmental type of activities that help create better understanding among parties. Then humanitarian assistance, helping people live for another day so that they have enough food and water and shelter so that they can actually work in rebuilding the country. And a large role is played by the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. And peacekeeping, which narrowly defined means that you're providing security using military forces, but now police as well and civilians to maintain security in the area so that someone who's attacking can't take advantage and that they would be stopped in their attack. And peace enforcement is if there's one side that's continually attacking and or the other side, either side, if they have been told many times you cannot continue to do this, and the UN has laid down the red lines, then as a last resort, the UN can use force against that party, not declaring them an enemy, but saying that if you want to live up to the peace agreement, then you have to do the following, or we won't allow you to disrupt the peace process, and you have to come to the negotiating table. So there's always impartial. It's a little bit like the way a police officer should be, no matter who is being arrested or the type of person that they're working with, they should be impartial. That is, that they should try to use the same methods and not use force unless absolutely necessary. And so that's peace enforcement. And then in all of this is conflict prevention, preventing conflict from escalating to higher levels. So this notion of peace operations gives you a sense of the various elements that can be involved in a peace operation, or some operations are focusing on one more than the other of these types. And this is actually very popular with Canadians. The Canadians view peacekeeping, this is from a 2008 Environics poll. If you ask them what is Canada's most positive contribution in the world, they say peacekeeping. And foreign aid, less than that. Multiculturalism accepts immigrants, less than that. But peacekeeping has been for 40 to 60 years the number one response that Canadians give. Now, it's an open question. That is, the Environics asks it with an open so they can say various things, and then they try and categorize them according to what they respond. And peacekeeping has declined in recent years, probably because Canada does a lot less of it now than it used to, but it's still very prominent in the psyche of Canadians. And we know that we have a strong peacekeeping tradition. That Canada led in the creation of peacekeeping when Lester Pearson proposed the first peacekeeping force in 1956 to help resolve the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Suez Crisis of 1956. And he won the Nobel Prize. Right, getting my crises mixed up, but there was a UN role involved in both those, Cuba and Suez.
Should bring back Mike Pearson.
Right. Yes. So yes, he was. Let's see. He was in opposition, I think, in the Canadian government in 1962 when the Cuban Missile Crisis. But he was very soon in power in '63 and helped establish another peacekeeping mission that was resolving another transatlantic rift and major crisis in the world. That is the crisis in Cyprus. That was 1965. So that actually is a good in our progression. So Canada supported peacekeeping, proposed the first peacekeeping force, had contributed to peacekeeping missions, that is observer missions before that, but made the big step in peacekeeping was the creation of the first armed mission in 1956. Then after he won the Nobel Prize in 1957, the Nobel Prize was given to all peacekeepers in 1988. And Canadians were the largest contributor up at that point, with some 10% of all peacekeepers. And the soldiers were recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize since it was given to UN peacekeepers. So a lot of Canadians won the Nobel Peace Prize at that moment, although they didn't get any of the Nobel Peace Prize money that was given to create a special Dag Hammarskjöld medal that was given to the families of those who died in peacekeeping operations. In 1992, the monument Reconciliation was built in Ottawa with showing peacekeepers on guard, communicating, a woman peacekeeper, a woman soldier communicating, and someone looking through binoculars. And that's a very prominent monument in Ottawa next to the National Art Gallery. Then in 94 and 96, two new centers were created, the Pearson Peacekeeping Center and the Peace Support Training Center. And they had mandates to do training of peacekeepers. So before they deploy, and also general training so people could be more aware of what peacekeeping does. In 95, peacekeeping made the back of the loonie. So the peacekeeping monument was actually placed in the back of the loonie. And in 2000, the Canadian military instituted the Peacekeeping Service Medal, which is given to those who served in peace operations for 30 days or more. Then in 2001, a UN peacekeeper, a woman looking through binoculars, wearing a blue beret, made the back of the $10 bill, and above her was the wording "Au service de la paix," in the service of peace, with a gold background. A really nice $10 bill that I still keep one copy of in my wallet because I'm kind of proud of that. Then, if we look at the most famous generals that we have who contributed, or most famous generals overall, I would put Lou Mackenzie and Romeo Dallaire, now particularly Romeo Dallaire, as being those who left an impact on the international community and who are best known in the world because of their service through peacekeeping. So the Canadian military has a proud role in all of that in UN peacekeeping and by contributing individuals. In fact, when I go into my college at the Canadian Forces College here in Toronto, I pass the plaque that lists the Canadians who died in the service of peace, from Brigadier General Engel in 1950 till when the plaque was made in 1999. And we see the names and the types of missions. UNEF is after UNMOGIP, which is in Pakistan. We see the United Nations Emergency Force, UNEF. We see the Congo operation. Then we see Cyprus and UNEF 2, which is created after the Yom Kippur War in '73. And then we see Cyprus again, Golan Heights, and Somalia, Bosnia, it's all of Bosnia. So until the turn of the century, Canada had the most number of fatalities in peacekeeping. So it was a tribute to the country that we had so many soldiers who sacrificed their lives in the cause of peace by serving in peacekeeping operations. Now we have to look at how peacekeeping evolved from the beginning. So the first missions were observer missions. Then we found ourselves with Pearson's interposed forces between two parties. And we have multi-dimensional and transitional administration. And there was Canadian leadership in all of this. And now the majority of operations are multi-dimensional. But let's have a look at the evolution a little bit. It's a very World Federalist thing to do, look at how the international order evolved. So the first mission was, well, according to the UN's list of missions, the first that was created by the Security Council was in Kashmir, but it didn't get off the ground till the mission in the Middle East. So we're seeing in the bigger picture here, observers in the Middle East were trying to monitor forces that were previously fighting with each other, armies, that is Israel and its neighbors fought the first Arab-Israeli war. And as part of the settlement was to create the UN peacekeeping mission, UNSO, UN Truce Supervision Organization. And actually it started even during the war in May or June 1948. And the peacekeepers were to make sure that there was the parties were abiding by the ceasefire. That if one side fired the first shot, then the UN would be able to say that they saw the shot being fired from this direction, so that it couldn't be denial, so that you could have some truth about what's happening. And then the mission in Kashmir started. And that was a conflict between India and Pakistan and some proxy forces. And Brigadier General Engel was the chief of the mission, but he died in the plane crash in 1950 while serving on UNMOGIP, which was actually created before UNSO by the Security Council. So these were early contributions. Canadians also served as head of UNMOGIP as well as the UNSO mission. And when Pearson proposed the first peacekeeping force, here you see units and not just individual observers, but you actually have battalions serving. And then General Burns, Tommy Burns, you can see in the top right here, he was brought from his job as head of UNSO to be head of this new UN peacekeeping force. And then Dag Hammarskjöld, the Secretary General, is seen in the middle here, just behind him in the general's uniform is Tommy Burns. They created this first force, and it actually created a buffer zone between the parties so that small shooting couldn't erupt into an entire war in the world. So we have this great evolution, step forward of international forces being created to serve the common good under the operational control of a UN Secretary General. And after the Cold War, and with one or two examples during the Cold War, we had an evolution to multidimensional peacekeeping. That is, these were missions that not only had the political discussions going on to try and facilitate peace, but you also had your military component, as in traditional peacekeeping. But then we had a humanitarian component, we had a police component, judicial, social, reconstruction, and economic. So really, you're trying to create all of the root causes you're trying to deal with in peacekeeping, so that you create, there's cohesion among people who formerly fought and hated each other, that you can have judicial mechanisms to resolve disputes through courts rather than through vendettas, and that you build reconstruction so you can have better commerce between different parts of the war-torn areas of the world. And that's what peacekeeping is now involved with, is this multidimensional approach. And so before, in traditional peacekeeping, we've just seen military involved, but now we have police. Police officers are brought in from Canada and other nations, and they help to create local enforcement. That is, they help local forces to better behave and better follow the rule and the laws of the country, and help create new legal systems that are for the benefit of the citizens of the country. So Canada has a good history of contributing police. In fact, we provide more police now than we do military officers to peacekeeping. But we do have a history of providing a lot of military officers doing a lot of civil military cooperation. Like the general is on his notepad here, Maurice Barry. He was the UN's military advisor to the UN Secretary General. And he was also doing a lot of coordination with the civilian side. So he helped create a mission for Eastern Zaire, and also coordinated so that there could be a lot of military, civilian, or civic cooperation. In fact, he was one of many generals. During the 1990s, we had at least 9 generals who were head of UN missions. I've shown pictures of some of them here, including General Dallaire is from the top left, second from the top left. And these generals served with great distinction in these missions, showing that the Canada could be very devoted to the cause of the Canadian military, and military officers could be very devoted to the cause of international peace and security. But there were also these difficult situations. We had the Somalia problem, where a Canadian soldier tortured a local Somali. We had the Americans withdrawing from the mission after 18 Rangers died during the Black Hawk Down incident. And we had Rwanda, where General Dallaire had to witness a genocide and felt incapable of stopping the larger genocide, although he did manage to save 20 to 30,000 lives. We had the embarrassments in Bosnia, with my friend Patrick Reckner being chained to a antenna to be used as a human shield against NATO bombing. So after he was released, NATO did carry out bombing and was able to force the Serbs to the negotiating table. We saw the Dayton Peace Accord and subsequent peace operations led by NATO be very successful in Bosnia, with a strong UN contribution on the police side. And then UN also became more robust. After those difficult experiences, they decided they needed things like attack helicopters. So we got these Russian attack helicopters from India and later Ukraine, which were deployed into the field and provided a bit of robust capability for these missions. And peacekeeping forces, typically during the Cold War, they were about 10,000, but they escalated after the end of the Cold War until there were about 80,000. That is in 1993, we reached the first peak there, and at 80,000. And then there was a decline as the number of wars declined and the UN did less peacekeeping. But in the year 2000, there were lots of conflict in Africa, and that just escalated till the UN reached its peak of 105 uniformed personnel, 105,000 uniformed personnel deployed in the field. That's more than any other entity in the world, including the US government, deployed personnel on operations. Although the Americans have more, if you consider their bases around the world, if you look at the actual operations they carry out, the UN carries out more. Then in 2016, when Donald Trump came into the presidency, there was a lot of pressure from the United States to reduce the costs. And even though it's a significant, it's less than 0.5% of the world's total military expenditure spent on peacekeeping. But there was a lot of pressure from the United States and some threats that we had to reduce the number of peacekeeping missions, the cost, and there would be more burden sharing. And of course, the UN had its own system for how to do the burden sharing, and it was unwilling to change that, which was actually a more fair system. And so what we saw is the UN went down in terms of the number of troops from 105,000 to around 78,000 currently in UN peacekeeping. What about Canada? Well, if you look at this graph from 1950 until 2020, we had contributed a few, while the missions were very small. But then in 1956, we saw this escalation with UNEF. Then we saw further escalation with UNFICYP in Cyprus, then UNEF 2. And then with the missions in early 1993, we went to the peak, which was 3,300. You can see for about 40 years there, Canada was contributing about 1,000 personnel, and sometimes even twice that amount. And then we went down at the end of the late 1990s as the UN went down. But when the UN started to go up again in 2000, Canada didn't join. So we did have a little heap when we contributed in Ethiopia and Eritrea, and we went to Haiti with MINUSTA mission. But the numbers really are quite low compared to anything historically. In fact, if we look from 1992, the Canadian military was up to 3,300, as I mentioned, and it's now down to about 20 to 30 military personnel. So quite a disappointment for those who want to see Canada leading. Since 2005, one of the first decisions of Stephen Harper when he came into office was to withdraw the mission from Golan Heights. And so we dropped from around 200 peacekeepers down to around 50. And we saw a brief jump in contribution to Haiti mission. Then one that's after this graph in 2018-19 we had in Mali, we jumped up. But the total number of peacekeepers didn't jump significantly. So again, Canadians viewed this very positive, viewed it the Canada's contribution, but it was out of step with the reality that Canada was no longer a major contributor to peacekeeping. And when Barack Obama called a meeting in New York, a leaders summit on peacekeeping, he wanted countries to pledge. And Canada made no pledge at that meeting. That was in 2015. And in fact, Justin Trudeau pointed to Stephen Harper and said, the fact that Canada has nothing to contribute to that conversation today is disappointing, because this is something that a Canadian Prime Minister started. And right now there's a need to revitalize and refocus and support peacekeeping. So the urgency of that was right now, we need to do something. This was just before he became Prime Minister himself. Then when he became Prime Minister, he mandated his foreign minister with the top priorities being to renew Canada's commitment to UN peacekeeping, UN peace operations, providing specialized capabilities, respond quickly to emerging and escalating conflicts, providing well-trained personnel, and doing a training effort to improve the training of military personnel. So these are three areas that Trudeau tasked his defense minister to do. And we supplemented that with a big pledge in 2016 to provide up to 600 troops and 150 police to UN peacekeeping missions. Now, at the time, Canada was contributing around 60. So this was multiplied by 10, the number of troops that we would be providing to UN peacekeeping, and with a sizable budget. So there was a subsequent ministerial held in Vancouver, which Trudeau addressed, and Canada didn't add new things to add new ceilings or levels, but it did pledge that we would work on peacekeeping initiative, the LC initiative, trying to get more women in peacekeeping. We do innovative training, and we said that we had advanced this pledge of the 600 military personnel, and we would include them in these categories. So these were pledges all made to the international community, to the United Nations, and we're still waiting for those pledges, initial pledges from London to be fulfilled. If you look at it, we had Paul Martin had provided over 300. If you look at the total military personnel, then if you look at Harper, we declined a lot, and then Trudeau, it's actually reached a lower point than Harper. Trudeau has contributed 50% less peacekeepers on a monthly basis than the Harper government, even though there would be a pledge to contribute more to renew Canada's commitment to peacekeeping, to renew it. Canada's rank fell from #1 during the Cold War and afterwards in 1991 to 93 to now position around 77th in terms of contributing nations to UN peacekeeping. Where are our military? Well, I'm sorry, it's a bit difficult to read here, but we have in Mali, we have a few. Let's just see. In Haiti, there are actually no more soldiers, but there are just a few police there. In Congo, about 10. Cyprus, we have 1. We were a backbone of the mission for 30 years, but now just have 1 soldier. South Sudan, about 10, and so about 4 or 5. So total is about 50 or so military and police, but the police are now contributing more. They're contributing almost 30, and the military is less than 30 personnel, which is a far cry from the Cold War contribution of 1,000. And we do make some advancement, women, peace and security, but if you actually look at the contributions of personnel to these missions, and arguably the best thing we can contribute are our armed forces personnel, but they are well-trained, bilingual, multicultural, and well-suited for UN peace operations. We contribute so few. So the number of military women now at this present moment is less than 10. And when I made the slide, it was only 1 military woman and 5 police. And the total number of police women is less than 20. So we have now just a handful of women deployed, and we're not providing an example to the world of how a country can contribute women to peacekeeping. We tried to get a seat on the Security Council, but we failed in part because we were not showing commitment through UN peacekeeping. We are active in the General Assembly, where we have the role of guiding the discussions about peacekeeping in the General Assembly and the Special Committee on Peacekeeping. So we do play a role there, and we do pay our dues in full and on time, including our peacekeeping contributions. So that's always appreciated by the United Nations. Well, it was Lester Pearson who said that we needed to create a means by which we could sustain the initial proposal for an international force. And he really wanted Canada to be a leader. And he said, if we don't build on what was done in 1956 and with the forces, then we will have betrayed the trust and rejected opportunities, missed opportunities. And he said, if they had stopped an all-consuming blaze from breaking out in Suez, then it could be done in many other parts of the world. And it proved right. Lester Pearson was right. This was a really strong mechanism to help the United Nations be able to have a boots on the ground to prevent armed conflicts. But the problem is the inconsistency and the unwillingness of nation states, member states like Canada, to provide the forces that are necessary to make peacekeeping work well. And so peacekeeping has been a struggle. But it is a continuing venture for all the things that are done in the field. We have so many different nations contributing such a wonderful multicultural expression of military power in the field through UN peacekeeping. And I do think that peacekeeping still offers us a chance for a safer world. It is a major way that we can allow the international community, the humans of the world, to express themselves for the safety and security of our own planet. And I would really like for Canada to step up again and become a heavy lifter in peacekeeping, that they do major contributions as it once did, both intellectual as well as with personnel and in leadership roles. And I think that Canada is well positioned to do that because our planet is well worth preserving and helping people in faraway lands. And when we create enough peace, we can do the other things that are necessary, like providing the vaccines that are needed in all these areas. And so I thank you very much for your presentation, for your attention. And I welcome any comments and discussion thereafter.
Oh,
Thank you very much, Walter. For the first time, I've really got a good appreciation of peacekeeping and what it entails. I've got a question for you. General de Chastelain did work in Ireland, the Irish conflict. I don't recall you mentioning that. Is that part of peacekeeping or is that not?
It was a peacekeeping-like activity inspired by peacekeeping. He had been a peacekeeper before, including commanding in Cyprus. But General Chastelain was responsible for the verification of the disarmament of the IRA weapons and the military side of the Good Friday Accords. And that involved making visits. So he would receive the reports from the parties about their weapons. He would do some inspections, but it wasn't through the UN. The British government didn't want the UN to do it. They wanted to be done through this body that was created by the agreement, of which General Chastelain was the chair. And it involved very few soldiers. So it wasn't a operational body in the sense of having a structure that maintained after its purpose or for the longer term. It was strictly there for the verification and facilitation of the Good Friday Accords. And it was quite successful in its task with minimal bureaucracy. And of course, it was UN endorsed, but at the same time, it was not a UN peacekeeping mission because the parties decided to do this on a much smaller scale. So they didn't go through the UN and create an operation.
Thanks, Walter.
Yeah.
Wow, Walter, thank you for the time frame and the whole history. That's the first time I've kind of seen it all together. I've read bits of your stuff before, but this was great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm wondering what if from your connections with the government, what's stuck in their throat about it? Why aren't they doing what they said they were going to do? I mean, that's
right. I've been scratching my head about that since 2015. And I had many conversations with many generals, politicians. I even asked Trudeau himself, why aren't we doing more in peacekeeping? And Trudeau simply said to me, we're working on it. I have tried to look in the bureaucracy to see where the blocks were. I think the military had a reluctance. They much prefer NATO and more war-oriented activities. So they did major operations in Latvia to deal with potential Russian invasion. They prefer the heavier equipment type activities that involve, fighter jets and tanks and the more traditional soldiering type activities. And so there is a reluctance in parts of the Department of National Defense on this. And I don't think the Chief of Defense Staff was a champion. Although the Chief of Defense Staff for most of Trudeau's period was saying he was in favor of peacekeeping, and originally looked like he had enthusiasm. He even wrote me that he was a believer in the United Nations. Jonathan Vance has subsequently been shown to be a hypocrite, that he would often say one thing and do something else. We saw that in his in the matter of Operation Honor that he created and that he tried to show that he was serious about, but then in fact was a poor example or a disgrace to the cause of promoting the end of sexual abuse and exploitation in the Canadian military. And similarly on peacekeeping, I don't think he provided the driving force. He provided some resistance. And I think that Harjit Sajjan, the defense minister, was not really willing to challenge the generals. He came in as a newly elected MP and then was given this very high profile. And he went from a lieutenant colonel to the head of the top, to being the boss of the top generals. So that's going up 5 ranks. And he wasn't inclined to challenge the establishment in the military. So we didn't get leadership from Harjit Sajjan. And Trudeau was great at giving speeches and putting up lofty ideals, but like on many areas, he was not someone who implemented much of what he said. So we actually saw peacekeeping fall to the lowest point since 1956 under Trudeau, despite some of the most lofty rhetoric about peacekeeping that we saw from any prime minister.
Do you think it might be the pressure of the military industrial complex to build ships and airplanes and all the job creation that's associated with that makes them want to not do peacekeeping, which doesn't need warships? And
there's an
bombers?
element to that. I mean, that would be, there's a whole mentality that comes with shifting from war fighting to peacekeeping.
Right.
And there's a reluctance to do that in part because you don't end up using those major tools that the military is so fond of and wants to get more of and it's asking the government for tens of billions of dollars for. But there's more to it than that. It's also a concept of what it means to be a soldier and where the priorities are. And Canada is really keen, the Canadian military is very keen to impress other militaries within the NATO alliance particularly, and also the United States government. So they take their lead a lot from the United States, where the United States has said that they leave peacekeeping to other nations. The nation building was not their thing. And as they showed in Iraq and Afghanistan, the United States is very poor at peace building. And so the Canadian military often want to be the little brother of the United States military. And I've seen that again and again in activities. So that was to our own detriment. And we didn't follow the strong tradition created from Pearson all the way to until the mid-1990s under Chrétien, where we did contribute in peacekeeping and substantially. But after that, there was no one who was really willing to provide the political will to overcome the inertia that exists within the Canadian Armed Forces. Peter.
So Walter, thanks for an excellent presentation. It's so comprehensive, and I've heard it before, but I think this is the best of the presentations. I had sort of two sort of naive questions possibly, but the decline in the incidence of peacekeeping appears to be roughly initiated with the demise of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War in the 90s. So just wondered what connections you would have on that. And the other thing with the multidimensional peacekeeping, where social and economic initiatives for positive peace following the war are part of that. I thought that was interesting, but Canada has fallen way behind in its foreign aid support, which is supposed to be 0.7% of our GDP, and I think it's somewhere below 0.3. I'm just so we are very poor on the socioeconomic part of the multidimensional peacekeeping scheme of things. I was just
No, you're absolutely right.
on that.
Yeah, so on the Cold War, when the Cold War ended, there was a major role for peacekeeping. I mean, peacekeepers oversaw the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Afghanistan in 88, 89. Then they were involved in creating a democracy in Namibia after South Africa released the Namibian people and allowed them to vote independently, and they chose self-governance. The UN was involved in bringing democracy into South Africa too, and the end of the apartheid regime with the election monitoring mission. They helped end the Central American wars, where there were so many dictators in Central and South America. And with the Escapulas II agreement, it allowed for Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala to be able to come to peace agreements with their rebel forces. And so the UN played a major role in verifying those agreements. And in Africa, the UN was also playing a role, and in Asia, Cambodia after all the difficult conflict. Finally, there was peace, and the Khmer Rouge were able to be effectively disarmed and pulled out of the equation through the untacking on transition administration in Cambodia. And then there was a mission that I participated in 1999 in East Timor, right, also in Asia, where we gave the Timorese people the opportunity after 450 years of colonialism and then 24 years of occupation to determine their future. And they decided to become a country, and they voted. And after a reign of terror, and I still bear some of the scars of that reign of terror psychologically, the UN came over and ran East Timor as a transitional administration until they turned over power to the Timorese, and it became a member state of the UN, 192nd member state of the United Nations. So there was a really important period where the UN played this transition, role in transition, and peacekeeping was very important. And so that's why we saw this big increase after the Cold War in the number of peacekeepers. But then after that, most of those transitions were done, the UN went down, and then we saw that in Africa, there was a huge need, and continuing in the Middle East as well. So we saw an increase in peacekeeping, and till we went higher than the previous peak.
Okay.
And the peacekeeping is multidimensional and includes the economic dimension. And so they need to work with the larger international community, with the UN Development Program, UNDP, budget around $6 billion a year. And international foreign aid, official development assistance, is around $130 billion a year. And peacekeeping is only $6 billion a year. But the ODA is really important to help these countries get off their feet and help prevent corruption and all that kind of things. And you're right that on ODA, Canada is also in default of its goals. It was Pearson who proposed in the 1980s that we create the 0.7% target.
Was it? Okay.
And Canada is less than half that now. And there are a few countries like Norway who beat us to get a Security Council seat in New York. They contribute over 1% of GDP. So we are relatively stingy on official development assistance. And Harper managed to get rid of the Canadian International Development Agency, or CEDA. And so it's currently much less clout as part of GAC, Global Affairs Canada. And so I think that we're seeing similar sorts of things, a lot of lofty rhetoric and lofty claims. You can even see that on the site, World Federalist Movement site, where the parties answered questions from the WFMC about their positions on peacekeeping, on the United Nations, and on development and climate change. And you can see a lot of lofty rhetoric from the parties, but we see that the reality on the ground is far less than what you would hope for based on what they're saying.
Well, thank you. I think that's excellent, and I'm glad that this is being recorded because.
Okay, great. Sheila.
Yeah, Walter, this was an excellent presentation. You taught me a lot. And I'm wondering if we have peacekeepers in Afghanistan, and I'm wondering, secondly, what you think needs to be done to increase our peacekeeping commitment.
Sure. So on Afghanistan, the UN created a small political mission. And so they can hardly be called peacekeepers. They aren't considered peacekeeping operations by the UN. They're considered a special political mission. There's around 200 to 300 internationals, and they have 2,000 or 3,000 local staff working for them. And unlike the NATO-led forces, ISAF, and especially the US forces under Operation Enduring Freedom, the UN assistance mission in Afghanistan was appreciated by the locals, and it didn't do any bombings and killings of people at weddings and things like that. UNAMA was not very powerful militarily, and it was primarily there for aid and for reconciliation. But the major powers didn't allow it to negotiate peace. They wanted to do that separately. Trump wanted to negotiate independently with the Taliban, and the Taliban wanted to didn't refuse to negotiate with the government. And so the UN role there was really about helping build the Afghan government, helping build reconciliation at a local level. And I've spoken with the commander in Kandahar, the UN representative in Kandahar, and he was in favor of negotiations back in 2006. In fact, he spoke in Pugwash, Nova Scotia about his dialogue with the Taliban then, and I was really hoping that that would be the avenue. And in 2010 to 12, I was actually writing and proposing a UN peacekeeping force in Afghanistan, UNAMA 2. And but there was little interest. The United States really wanted to handle this thing as their own project and didn't want to get the UN involved. And now that the US has withdrawn and Canada has withdrawn and all of the NATO forces have withdrawn, the UN is still there. They're continuing to work under horrible conditions, under very risky to their own lives. But there are almost 3,000 UN personnel working in Afghanistan to this day when the need is so strong. So the lasting power, the commitment power of the UN is much greater than the United States or NATO. And I regret that I didn't push harder. In fact, I felt really sad when Kabul fell that I didn't make a larger effort to promote a UN assistance mission in Afghanistan #2 that would involve armed forces. I proposed that it be made primarily of forces from Muslim countries, so it'd be more acceptable to the local population and to the Taliban. But unfortunately, the international community decided not to go the peacekeeping route in Afghanistan, tried to go with the global war on terror and with CIA-led nation building, particularly the choice of Hamid Karzai as the first president of Afghanistan. And we see the disaster that came as a result. And I only wish I could have done more to try and help the people in Afghanistan.
Yes, Walter. How about Myanmar? Is there any UN?
Excuse me, Norbert. There's a gentleman, somebody on the phone who's had a hand up for a while. I'm not sure who it is, but maybe they could speak up.
Oh, it's Melanie.
Oh, hi, Melanie.
I'm not muted. Okay. Yes. Well, you pointed out so much about the importance and the need for peacekeeping and some of the failures in the future. I just see this huge problem of global migration. And I wonder if you could comment on the relationship of peacekeeping and migration.
You're quite right that we have to solve these problems locally so people can have sustainable livelihoods and live in peace, so that the mass migration isn't affecting other countries the way they do in unsupportable ways. So we have, for the Haitians, for instance, who were under a bridge on the U.S. side from on the Mexican-U.S. border, and then they had to be deported by the thousands back to Haiti. Well, the UN had a mission in Haiti, but as a result of the Trump administration's pressures to end missions, the UN mission ended in Haiti. And so we were not, the UN was not present with a peacekeeping mission when the president of Haiti was assassinated. Prior to that, the UN would provide security assistance to the Haitian president. So there was a failure again, very, very typical of the Trump administration taking a sledgehammer to the international order. And we dealt with the repercussions of that even months and years later. So we really have to strengthen the UN so that it rebuilds and it gets re-involved in Haiti and many other places, and largely in Africa. Now, I was at a Partnership for Technology and Peacekeeping symposium in Germany, in Berlin, about 3 years ago. And I met at that point with the defense minister of Germany, Ursula von der Leyen. And I said to her, well, it looks like Germany, who's now contributing in a major way to peacekeeping, has advanced forces and is bringing UAVs to the UN for observation in Mali, no shooting of missiles, but just for observation. That these contributions are amazing, and the German government had sponsored us to help out and sponsored us this conference, the symposium in Berlin. And so I complimented her. It looks like Germany has really learned the lessons of 2 world wars, that we really have to work for peace. And he said, yeah, not only that, but we also have to create peace in other lands so that we don't have the massive migration that would force upon us. So they had to accept 1 million Syrian refugees in 2015, 2016. And the German government wants to make Africa become more peaceful. So it really is in the German interest. And she went on to become president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and had the right attitude. And now she's talking about the idea post-Afghanistan, post-US withdrawal, of creating a European army. And I believe the Europeans have enough cohesion, enough liberal sentiment, and enough enlightenment to actually create an army that could do big service to UN peacekeeping and the cause of peacekeeping as a whole. So I think we definitely need to make the world a better place and reduce those gross inequalities that we have. And peacekeeping is part of that solution. Norbert?
Thanks, Walter. My question is, does the United Nations have any peacekeeping missions in Myanmar?
Right. No, the Myanmar government would not allow peacekeeping missions there. Ironically, there was a Secretary General, U from Myanmar, from Dag Hammarskjöld's death, in 1961 until 1972, he held office. And the Myanmar government actually rejected him because they were they didn't want to claim his views as their own, because he was part of a previous government under the original president of Myanmar, U Nu. And so U Thant was trying to create peace in Vietnam, but the Americans wouldn't have it in the 1960s, although he had back channel negotiations with the North Vietnamese forces. And Myanmar, the military junta, otherwise known as the SLORC, for most of its history, the State Law and Order Council, they did not want any UN intervention. They had a civil war. They had a rebellion in the Karen region, and the Karen rebellion. And now they have a fighting with the Rohingya, but largely it's a slaughter. The generals have just slaughtered the Rohingya and forced them to flee into Bangladesh and other countries. So the government of Myanmar was not allowing it, even under Aung San Suu Kyi. And it was because the military would not allow it. They view the security in Myanmar as being their own responsibility. So as World Federalists, we want to see justice done for the people of Myanmar. So the positive side is the International Criminal Court is looking at starting cases for violations against the Myanmar population. And we could eventually see the UN create a peace enforcement action or put so much pressure on the Myanmar government that they do allow a peacekeeping force there, which I think would be in long-term interests of the Myanmarese people. But right now in our world of sovereign states, we do allow the people, the de facto rulers, to decide whether they allow peacekeeping forces. And that means that, that there's no hope at this point for a peacekeeping force in Myanmar.
Wow.
Well, Walter, is sort of, that was one of my questions. This requirement for consent to enter a country to sort things out. At what point does the responsibility to protect override that? I know it isn't yet, but surely the world's got to move in that direction of saying, to heck with you government people or whoever, we're coming in there to sort something out.
I completely agree with you, John. And under the doctrine or formula for the responsibility to protect, there should be an intervention force in Myanmar. The doctrine states that if a government is unwilling or unable to protect its own people, then it becomes a responsibility of the international community, particularly the Security Council. But overcoming the Russian and Chinese veto is at present impossible. And then dealing with a nation that would not accept a force, then it would be like an invasion force considered by the Myanmar generals, and it might actually be active combatants, active fighting. So the UN doesn't have the capacity, nor the stomach, or the desire to intervene. So they have major humanitarian actors in there. And what I would hope for is that the large pressure put on the junta in Myanmar, that they accept a peacekeeping force. So it wouldn't be an intervention force. It wouldn't be an invasion. It would be done with the tacit acceptance of the Myanmar government, and that they can begin to provide security in those regions and start to provide some of the liberties that are so necessary for the people of Myanmar. But it would be a long building process to come back to democracy.
It seems the world needs to work more on its own institutions, like the Security Council, to get that sorted out. Now, I haven't had a chance yet to read Antonio Guterres's September report, but does he mumble anything about changes to the operations of the Security Council or the General Assembly relating to peacekeeping?
So traditionally, Secretaries General, and Antonio Guterres is no exception. The Secretaries General do not seek the major reforms because they're servants. They consider it's not their place to tell the Security Council that they view that they will help implement what the Security Council decides. They might give inferences and complain about deadlock in general, but they'll do so in very diplomatic language. We had such a long history of deadlock on Syria with 3 vetoed resolutions, at least on Syria. And sure, the Secretary General will point that out. But in terms of the actual reform of the institution, enlarging the Security Council, the Secretary General will be very cautious because he really doesn't feel that it's his place. He's head of one of the 6 principal organs of the UN, and that's where he has to make implement reform. And he did do a major reform of the Secretariat. But it could very well be that the Security Council or the other bodies would say it's none of your business how we run our organ of the UN. And also the Secretary General obviously needs to make sure that none of the veto powers veto him. I mean, they didn't for his re-election. And this SGs have only served 2 terms. So he might be more bold as the end of his 2nd term comes up. But at the same time, the SGs have been very cautious on those major reform issues. And so it relies on NGOs like us to try and push for reform and keep that voice up.
Well, the UN 75 was pushing on all this, and then everything went in abeyance because wait till September when the SG comes out with his proposed response to all that. And if it's a ho-hum nothing about the core problem, what was the point of the UN 75 program? And
yeah, well, I mean, it is disappointing. But at the same time, we have to keep up. Every UN anniversary, we have to keep pushing and pushing for the sake of our world, for the sake of the planet that I see behind you. And we have to make sure that those people like Secretary General Guterres are supported because they're pushing what they can. They're pushing in the right direction. I mean, he does very enlightened reports. His most recent speech in the General Assembly was really talking about the failure of the international community and kind of cascading a wide criticism of the international community. Tries to avoid fingering individual nations. It's not the diplomat's way or the way of the Secretary General. But we have to keep pushing on these things. And often ideas take decades to come about. And if you're looking at humanity as a whole, I mean, our species, Homo sapiens, has only been in existence for 250,000 years, 250,000 years. And recorded human civilization is only about, 5,000 years recorded history, depending on how you want to start it. And of those 5,000 years, the International Organization for Peace is only 100 years old. That is with the League of Nations after the First World War. And the UN is 3/4 of that, now 75. And so, we're talking about civilizational changes here, and we have to be patient. At the same time, the ardor that's necessary in the face of the challenges to the planet, whether it be climate change or nuclear weapons or pandemics, show the importance of having strong international organizations. We need a stronger World Health Organization. So we really have to keep up this push and not get discouraged.
Sorry, Norbert, but just one last comment. Maybe us world federalists need to act as sort of a mirror for the world to take all that hand-wringing associated with the mess in Afghanistan or Syria or whatever and say, well, if you're worried about that, then fix the organization that's in charge of all this, namely the UN, and then maybe we won't have these problems.
I think we need to do both, fix the problem as much as we can, problem by problem, and then get these larger questions solved of Security Council membership. And the problem of Security Council membership is not that easily fixed because the power dynamics, even with the changed Security Council composition, would still be there. You have the major powers blocking in different ways. So I do want Security Council reform, but at the same time, we have to deal with human nature and the nature of political leaders around the world, including Vladimir Putin in the current case, and other leaders.
So my question is basically an extension of this. Would a United Nations Parliamentary Assembly make a significant difference to the situation in Myanmar and Syria?
I think so. I mean, the more political clout you have, the more influence you can exert on the situation. And a UN Parliamentary Assembly composed of parliaments from around the world, including some from Myanmar. We'd have to see exactly which representative from Myanmar, whether it be from the junta or from Aung San Suu Kyi's government. But the Parliamentary Assembly will add more clout to and more democratic legitimacy. And so you could put more pressure. And eventually I see our UNPA as requiring more powers. And in the case of Uniting for Peace, if the Security Council is deadlocked, then eventually it could be transferred to the General Assembly or the UN Parliamentary Assembly. So I think these are all good proposals that we should be creating these new structures. But right now it's still a long ways from creating a UNPA. And we hope that, that the General Assembly itself can get involved. And it did get involved in Syria and created some fact-finding bodies which will prove very useful when eventually there's going to be some sort of reconciliation or adjudication of the people who committed wrongdoings in Syria.
So Walter, just following up on another one of your responses with respect to the responsibility to protect and the Russian and China vetoes. This is a naive question, but what's the Russia and China strategy all about? And given that the United States is perceived as an enemy, what can they do about that veto problem?
Right. So I think we'll make this the last or second to last question, so that we'll have a 1.5 hour recording. But I'm willing to stay on for some minutes afterwards. This is a really important question. And Russia and China have some similar policies and some very different ones. I would say that both of them, and this is across the P5, is they don't want to lose their veto power. That's a very important power, and they think that they've earned it, and their station in the world, it means that they should have the veto. So they will block changes, and unfortunately, the veto powers have veto over changing the veto. So we have this terrible dilemma. And not only can they veto it in the Security Council, but also it has to go through their parliaments. The permanent 5 parliaments have to adopt the change to the veto. That means the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in the United States Senate, and also means the governments in the Duma that's controlled by Vladimir Putin, or in the Congress that's controlled by our friend President Xi Jinping. So this means that those kind of major reforms, although we got to keep pushing for it, they're not in the cards in the near future. There may be some enlightened Gorbachev type leader, but unfortunately, the United States did not accept Gorbachev's proposals for UN reform when he made them in 1987, 88. But that was a golden moment in human history where we could have remade the world. We created a League of Nations after the First World War, after the wreckage of that war. We could create something better. After the Second World War, we decided to make a stronger organization, a United Nations. And after the third major Cold War, which was held our planet in its grips, it was a much longer war, much more resources than World War I and World War II, although much fewer deaths, thank God. But after that Cold War, there were a few enlightened proposals, including from President Gorbachev, for UN reform, but we made no major steps. So that was a major flaw in human evolution and human civilization. And now we hope that there will be enlightened leadership, and we may need to wait for other leaders in Russia and China before we can get the kind of partnerships that are needed. After all, we just came through very unenlightened leadership in the United States, and we need some sort of coincidence between the major leaders to be able to make the major reforms that are necessary. Shall we leave it at that for now and go off recording, and any personal comments we can make afterwards? And
I'd just like to thank you, Walter. That was very informative for all of us. It does, to me, and I'm sure to the others, show us very clearly the problems that we are facing all around the world, and possible solutions too. And hopefully, with working with the World Federalist movement, we can make certain changes happen to facilitate the possibilities. Thanks again.
great, thank you. We have a great cause. We have some great people who are working in our movement, and I would encourage anyone and everyone to consider helping us in this global planetary cause. Thanks for all the organizers of this event. It's been a pleasure being with you.
Thank you.